Hello all, this is Tim. Before we get to the main episode with the sound team from Adolescence, I have a couple quick messages for the listeners. Bear with me, I'll be quick. First up, we're down to the last week or so to submit to the Tonebenders Listener Field Recording Stories episode. If you have a favorite sound that you've recorded, please send it along with the story of how you captured it, and you can be part of our future episode with other listeners telling their stories. You have until August 15th. Full details on how to participate can be found at tonebenderspodcast.com, and then click at the link at the top. Everyone that submits name will be entered into a draw for a free pair of O-Mini microphones, so send in your tales for your chance to win. Listeners in London, come out to the second Tonebenders London Sound Design Meetup sponsored by the Motion Picture Sound Editors on August 24th at 7 p.m. Come join the London sound community to see some old friends and meet a bunch of new ones. It will be at the Crown and Two Chairmen in Soho. Don't miss it. And finally, Tonebenders will be at the Toronto International Film Festival again this year. So if you worked on a film that will be playing there, let me know and I will do my best to go see it. If you are going to be at TIFF yourself, let me know that too. Maybe we can hang out. Okay, let's get to my interview about the impressive sound design on Netflix Adolescence.
He's a good kid, yeah, and I'm a good dad. Do you know what I mean? He really is. Look, you said yourself. You even said he was bright. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I did.
So, do you understand?
I can see that, but here we are now, and we've this to deal with, okay? And I think the police have some pretty compelling evidence. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to ask for blood. They wouldn't have been able to make the entrance that they did. Now, I don't know what that evidence is, but I'm pretty sure it's going to become clear to us very soon, okay? So, the best thing for you to do is to raise that chin up, be the good dad, and suck it up, okay?
Yeah.
Welcome to Tonebenders Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Sound Ideas is introducing the newest installment to the Hollywood Edge's legendary sound effect collection, Premiere Edition, Volume 12. Build a rich audiosphere to enhance all your productions with this impressive assortment of sound genres ranging from machinery to nature to science fiction. Access over 3,000 sounds available in 4 resolutions with descriptive metadata and UCS formatting. Head over to sound-ideas.com to learn more. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders Sound Design Podcast. My name is Tim Muirhead, and I will be your host today as we talk about the intense Netflix drama, Adolescence. This series is impressive for its story and performances and its ambition to let the audience actually think out what is happening and the greater consequences of people's actions. The production style is also unbelievably ambitious, with each of the 4 episodes made up of one continuous shot from start to finish. This wonder technique of filming opens up the sound team to an incredibly tricky set of circumstances that most productions don't have to figure out how to deal with at all. From finding ways to keep the mics out of shots in production to the possibility of everything panning in the final mix. This would have been a project that required immense planning and focus on details that would be intimidating right from the start. But luckily, I have 4 of the sound team's principals with me today to talk us through how they were able to masterfully pull it all together. All 4 are currently nominated for Emmys in the sound editing and sound mixing for a limited anthology series category. Congratulations, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's welcome the production sound mixers on Adolescence, Rob Entwistle and Kiff McManus. It's great to have you both on Tonebenders. Great to meet you both.
Nice to meet you too.
Hi, thank you. How you doing?
We also have from the post side of things joining us today, James Drake, who is the supervising sound editor. It's lovely to see you, James.
Good to see you. Thanks, Tim.
And finally, we have Adolescence re-recording mixer, Jules Woods, joining us. Thanks for making the time today, Jules.
Thank you very much for having us.
So let's start from the very beginning. The series starts with a very quiet conversation in a car, in a calm neighborhood. The sun's just coming up, everything's nice and calm. And then they drive about half a block, and all hell breaks loose. This is a scene where the police invade a home of a completely unexpected family, and for a few minutes, it's absolute chaos, but there's no overpowering sounds. No gunshots happen, no one's getting punched in the face, and yet, sonically, it's an overwhelming and chaotic feeling while you're watching it. Maybe let's start from on set. Kiff, do you want to talk about capturing the sound on set when so many people are talking at the same time?
The director really wanted to have it as real as possible for the cast. So both James and I said, well, perhaps the people downstairs could stop shouting at each other while we're recording upstairs. And the director said, no, I don't want to do that. So on set, basically, we put a lot of plant mics into the house. Everyone in the house was on a radio mic, which we're also recording, which was actually incredibly useful because we used the new 32-bit float record option on the Wizzycoms we were using. The first time they did it for real, it completely just blew out all the mics. Well, not the mics, the transmitters. I'm sitting in the van. We've got the gain set quite low. As you said, it goes from really, really quiet to suddenly cacophonous noise. So the mics were just popping all over the place. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'm not sure how we can do this, because later on, those same mics, still on the cast, were going to go to a police station for Rob, and they spoke really, really softly. So we couldn't really pop the gain all the way down because it would be useless later on. The amazing thing about the whole Adolescence thing is we had the post guys on set with us, which I've never had before. It's the most useful thing because we could literally come back, James, please listen to this, see what the 32-bit float's like, if I've got it or not. And he sort of went away, listened to it. Yep, clear, nice, all fine. So I could kind of dismiss that and think, okay, even if I can set the gain on the mics, that it will kind of work for the whole program. And if I get those really high peaks, it's not going to ruin it because the recording will actually catch that. And James later can sort of meld it in. Enormously sort of overwhelming sound. Okay, we recorded all of that, but that really comes down to James later on, completely picking it all apart and putting it back together in a way that sort of worked, to give exactly the same feeling, because it was bedlam in there. It really was.
James?
Yeah, when you're there on the day, it's chaos. And I remember exactly as you said, Phil, Kev speaking to Phil and saying, by the way, we've wild tracked all the essays now. We've got loads of variations. We've got everything them saying. So if you want, they don't have to say anything anymore. And Phil was like, no. We need them saying it. We need the energy. We need the chaos. The work was done by Rob and Kiff on set, and I was there to go, this is great, or maybe we can try something else. And with the opening, it was, we had everything. We had 10 takes, and then it was that kind of slow process of listening to everything again, unpicking it, panning it, moving it. Will this work if we move this here and do that? And can I steal a little bit from this take and a bit from that take and rebuild it? The great thing is that we had everything we needed. There's barely any ADR, and the only ADR we had in there was additional stuff, and only very small bits because we had so many takes. We had 10 takes, so we'd just be able to pull and find stuff. And that kind of 3 minutes, that absolute chaos 3 minutes, is probably the most challenging, but also the most fun bit of editing I think I've ever done.
Jules, what was it like mixing that sequence?
It was interesting. I mean, we had so much content to work with, but it all had to be really kind of intricately placed. We wanted to keep that chaos and real sense of panic, what was going on, but there was some quite difficult moments to shape, like when the camera moves past the daughter, she's kind of cowering in the corner crying. We needed to make sure we still allowed space for her crying to cut through. And little bits like that. We were changing stuff right up until the kind of final exec review day. We were still moving things around and adding little extra bits and pieces, a few more cries from downstairs maybe. It was complicated, but it was good fun.
Yeah, that reminds me, Jules, I think an hour before the final mix review, and I think we watched that sequence again, and he was like, it'd be great if we could have Stephen say something at this point. And there was just this little breath of air that just dropped suddenly. After listening to all 10 takes so many times, I was like, I think I know exactly what you're looking for and where it is. And we went through all the takes and found this little piece of the puzzle to fit in right at the very end. Yeah, just really fun to work on that.
I think Kiff mentioned that there were plant mics. Do you want to talk about where they were placed and maybe if they were used at all in post?
I think 2 of the plant mics ended up using, because we had 4, didn't we, Kiff, which sat on its own little recorder.
One on the banister, one in the hall for Stephen, one in Stephen's bedroom for the forensic people who go in there, and one downstairs. Either 1 or 2 downstairs, one in the kitchen, an extra one in the sitting room, just a 50 just pointing generally into that area.
Yeah, I definitely remember using 2. There was definitely the 2 on the stairs we ended up using, just to help set the radios in and kind of warm them up, put them in that kind of little space. Because acoustically, it was quite a challenge, wasn't it? Because you are moving through so fast, and you want to feel the sonic change. You want everything to be cohesive, but you still want to feel the difference between the stairs and the bedroom.
Because we had a mic on the camera the whole time as well. Was that ever used?
At every point in the series, there's either a boom or a plant running.
Yeah.
It's not only the labs. We obviously used them quite a lot because we wanted to get the panning and movement, and we needed the isolation to do that. But there's always one of your booms or one of your plants running, because I love trying to use natural acoustics where I can rather than adding it in.
Online, there's tons of behind-the-scenes footage of how the camera teams passing the camera from one person to the next. There's not a lot online of how the sound team dealt with it. Rob, maybe you can talk about how many boom ops were needed to pull off a oneer like this, how many people were on the sound team.
Myself, Kiff, James there too. Maybe it should be 9. You were there, James, so it's 9. And 3 boom ops, Carl, Ash, Tom. And we had 2 second nurses who, their job was obviously to put the labs on, she and Joe, and then our trainee, Hannah, was pretty much in the front line quite a lot, more than she was probably comfortable for, but she did an amazing job. Yeah, it was. And people go, wow, you have that many people in your team. You go, yeah, well, look at what we had to do. It was the exact right amount. Like anyone less would have been missing a person for sure.
On the 4th episode, I think only Hannah, the trainee, didn't actually hold a boom, and she was doing playback.
Yes, because she was trapped in the back of a van, right?
Because she was stuck in the back of a van, and couldn't get out. But if she could have got out, we'd have definitely had her holding a boom as well. We had just enough people. I mean, honestly, we could have done with like 1 or 2 more. Rob and I were originally discussing what we needed for it. When we came up with 8, I was already thinking, I'm not really looking forward to this chat.
No.
With production. I think if we can get away with 8, that's already pretty good. To be fair to them, they were great about it. They never once, when we said we really need this, turned around and said, well, why? Can't you just use the radios? Or, that discussion was never had. Couldn't have happened without that whole team, really, that we used every single one of them all the time.
All 4 of you were on Boiling Point, the director's previous project that had a similar aesthetic of long shots. Maybe Jules, you can start with this. What you learned from that previous project that maybe gave you confidence taking on this one?
The trickiest things with long shots like that is marking the progress of change between environments. So when you have traditionally edited TV shows, you've got the hard cuts, which you can really rely on to emphasize those changes in environments and situations. But with the continuous shots, making sure there's enough energy to keep those moments going can be really challenging. And I think that's something we learned a lot about in Boiling Point, certainly with some of the transitions through the kitchen. When we move from one side to the other, there are moments where there's a massive fire burst, or, we hear a real close-up sound of some pots and pans as we're going past the dishwash and things like that. And that certainly was useful to fall back on in Adolescence. Obviously, even more so because the takes are a whole hour long, essentially. And it was even more important to be able to mark those transitions during that as we move from the house to the street outside, through the school, to the hardware store. All of these changes in environments. And also they tend to follow a change of emotion as well. So learning how to use sound to keep those changes in location energetic and noticeable without cuts was a challenge.
Kiff, do you want to talk about from a production sound point of view, what you learned from the first project that you brought to this one?
How to plan it. That was the big thing. It's when you first look at something like this, you look at the script and it just seems it's such a ball of string. It actually probably took me longer to do the planning on Boiling Point than it did on Adolescence, but only because I just couldn't figure out how to depick it. But then on Adolescence, both Rob and I had that experience already. So we could sort of start to break it down into doable chunks. It's like eating an elephant. You do it one bite at a time. You just have to pick certain things out and go, okay, we need this for this scene. We need this for this scene. We need this for this scene. We'll lose this at this scene. So we need, kit-wise, we're going to need that. Operators, how many do we need? Because we're going from here to here and there's someone left there. Okay, they can get to the next place, but they're not going to be there before. So it's all that. It was just breaking it down into sort of plannable action plans, I suppose. And then once you have that, then you can say, okay, so we need roughly this amount of kit, roughly this amount of people. And then you get really granular of each scene and go, okay, I'll move you from here to here. We'll have mics. We need mics here, so we need more channels, so we need more mixers. We need to leave a mixer in that location to get those extra mics. Because, obviously there's a limited number of channels you can actually have immediately accessible. And we had cars and vans and, all this sort of stuff. So the channel count kept getting bigger. And both Rob and I just went, okay, we can use this mixer of mine, chuck that in there. And, eventually we just go, okay, we're running out of kit now.
It started with pen and paper, didn't it, Keith?
Yeah, absolutely.
Bare bones kind of, okay, let's sit down with scripts. Okay, this is the amount of kit we've got. This is the kit type we've got. And we would just literally mark down each person and you break it out. Okay, we've got enough kit, potentially, enough channels, potentially, to do this episode. And as more information comes along, you kind of, where you apply that kit, where it goes, and what, like I say, what you're going to lose, changes it again. So you kind of, it's a constant reassessment, isn't it? Until we got to the point when we were putting people in rooms with cameras, You get to that point by increments, don't you? So you get to this point where you start with the basic information, which is a script, working all the way through to the dance that the boom ops have to do around the camera. And it's just a process. You can't go from A to B. You have to do all the process in between. That was a blueprint that Boiling Point set, really, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. You can't know at the beginning how it's going to be. You can have a plan that just tells you what your resources are and what resources you need. But then how eventually you employ all those resources will change, because also your first thoughts about reading the script, you think, oh, we'll just do this. But then when you see what they're going to do, you think, well, that's not going to work at all. We'd have one Boiling Point-like problem, but that was just one episode. And then you had another one that's completely different, in every respect. So you just had to come up with a whole new plan.
They were quite unique.
Yeah, they were challenging but fascinating.
Yeah.
Is wireless range an issue? Because obviously in Boiling Point, it was in relatively small confines. Is that something you had to plan out as well? Is someone going to go out of range of where we can reach?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, the house scene in the first episode. Originally, I thought, I had fins set up in the sound van, which was also the video village. And at first, when we were doing the testing, it was working just perfectly like that. But as soon as we did a full test with all the police in there, imagine all those big bodies. From the front of the house, you could not get into the back bedroom reliably. You start getting hits and drop out and stuff like that. So then you have to go, okay, I need a pair of fins around the back of the house, high up, but then I also need cabling to get those fins plug into the mixer in the van. 50-meter cables. And then I had the trainee standing there with two drums and, two cables to chuck through the window of the van so I could plug them in, and then off we went again. Yeah, it was a problem. That is one thing, though, about this is Kyle, main boom up, said this one time. He goes, you've just got to be completely focused for that whole period, the whole take. And you do. And that's not actually as easy as one would think. Because to properly concentrate for an hour is difficult. It really is. But you absolutely must. The boom ups had to. I mean, okay, there are slight pauses when you, for example, I'd hand over to Rob or Rob would hand over to me and stuff, and you go, whew. And again with the boom ups. But while you're on, you can't make a mistake.
There's moments when we would hand over to each other is when you realise how
Yeah.
intense it is. And it's suddenly like, oh, Kiv's turn now.
Bye.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, me too.
It feels like something that would be both intimidating and exhilarating and get your endorphins going every day in a way that other projects might not allow for that. Maybe we can talk a little bit about post for a second. There are moments in the series where it's hyper-realistic, when we're invading the house, for instance. But then there's other moments where we get subjective, we go into people's heads kind of, and dialogue starts getting obscured. James, do you want to talk about when did those kind of more subjective moments get put in? Did you guys design those? Were they in the script originally? And how did you go about transitioning from the hyper-realistic to the subjective?
There was a little bit in the script. I think for episode 1, Jamie in the van, it wasn't kind of mentioned that we went into his head or that there would be score or anything there. I think it just kind of said the camera just stays on Jamie and we just stay on Jamie and we just stay on Jamie. When I was first speaking to Phil about it, maybe a year before we started, it was very much, maybe not, we're not going to have score. Maybe we're not going to have big sound design moments.
In the whole project, you mean?
Yeah, in the whole project. Originally, we were kind of going in like we did with Boiling Point, the feature, just playing it all naturalistic. And then after they shot episode 3, there were a few moments that they felt the score would just help and just support some of the emotional states that the characters were in and bridge a few gaps. They tried it, and Aaron David, the brilliant composers, did such a wonderful job that I think it started to open up more. And then while we were shooting episode 2, I think in the tech rehearsal week, they had the Jamie in the van sequence, and they were still trying to work on it and kind of decide what they wanted to do. So we actually went to the little cutting room we had on set and did a pass the scene, and then Phil came in and I was just kind of throwing sound design at it. I knew that Phil liked cellos, and I had kind of a few kind of cello recordings and just mangled them up and made them all spacey and crazy. And we just tried that as a start. And then Phil came in and said, I've got this, I think it was an app or something he was using, but it's like, what I really want is a ticking clock sound. And so the ticking clock that's actually in the score was something that Phil picked out while we were kind of just working on that sequence when it was still sound design. And then I think as soon as we did Jamie in the van, then it opened up the series a lot more and just allowed us to be more experimental. So, you know, you have some quite big sound design sequences in 4 in the end that kind of going in, we just never expected. But yeah, as soon as Jamie in the van and then the score was done for that, it completely changed the way that we were working and thinking creatively about it, because it meant that I could go, well, perhaps here we could try this, or here we can try that. So it was an exploration of having a take there to watch and go, what can we do creatively now? So it was a really kind of just natural progression, actually, of beginning to work on something and then going, okay, what can we do? How can it help?
Jules mentioned earlier that changing scenes was something that you found difficult. In some instances, when they walk out of rooms, you hear whooshes. You hear, like, super subtly. And the odd time, I think that I heard some whooshes on camera movements as well. That obviously, I guess, evolved as well in a similar way.
Yeah, in the raid, it was something that I put in on the big cars going down the street. I think it was before we were doing the temp mix, or maybe I was going into ADR with Phil, because I'm always working on it. When we're going into ADR, I'm constantly sending Phil stuff and playing back against the edit as it's evolving. So it's always new things, it's fresh, you can feed back. It was either before the temp or some ADR, and I just went, there's this big panning camera move. I'll just put some design on it. There's no music there yet, but let's just try something. And I kind of expected Phil to hear it and go, maybe we don't need that. But he was like, cool, love that. And so it stayed. There's the camera pans in the house, which just have a bit of a whoosh under. Episode 2, Ryan and Bascom, the chase, there's a few kind of little whooshes and rustles as we go past. I think the big camera move is kind of the most sound designing I get. But the whooshes and everything else were just kind of trying to be subtle, but just give a little bit of energy, a little bit of excitement to those moments.
Jules, do you want to talk about the idea of keeping energy in a scene where there's not a lot of kinetic energy happening in the scene, meaning basically the last 25 minutes of episode 1 are 5 people sitting in an interview room speaking. Very little actual physical movement other than the camera, which is moving around. And then also basically the entire episode 3 is 2 people in a room together. What I found, especially for episode 3, is there's a lot of sound going on in that room that has to be there so that you can take it away at the few key moments where it disappears and it's a gut shot. For instance, the one time when it's first said she's dead. Do you want to talk about kind of maintaining energy so that you can have it to take away and such when there isn't something on screen to represent?
Yeah, I think episode 3, out of all 4 episodes, was probably the hardest because of exactly what you're saying. Finding a way to keep the energy going when we're essentially in one room for the entire duration is hard. When there's a big, busy scene, you've got lots of places to hide, you've got lots of distractions, and, you know, lots of sound is much easier than not very much sound. But to keep the energy there, we had to just place stuff very specifically. So we wanted there still to be activity in the building, so you can see some people walking around the corridors in the background of the interview. We hear little bits of their footsteps. One of the main things that we used was weather. And there's a whole progression with the weather in the background. There was actually, you never see it in the episode. You see some subtle changes in the lighting, but there was actually a skylight above where they were having their interview. It was something that Phil mentioned to James really early on in the process, that he wanted to hear some weather outside. And that changes really dynamically with the emotion in the room. So as Jamie's getting really, you know, agitated or wound up and is about to snap, you can hear the rain build in intensity. There's elements of thunder in there. And then we use those to cut really hard for when he snaps, or for when there's those gut punch moments of mentioning that, do you know what death is, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, weather was a really useful tool. Even though, like you said, even though there's not a lot of stuff happening in the room, the camera is moving all the time. And so especially in the interview scene at the end of Ep 1, and especially in episode 3, there's always movement happening. So even those little sounds that we have put in, maybe the birds or the wind or the rain, they're constantly moving and the perspectives are changing. And it's the same with the dialogue as well. Like episode 1 is a real good example of that. As you know, every time the camera moves away from Bascom to Jamie, he pans off to the left. The reverb increases, the perspective changes with the EQ. So there's constant movement. I don't think there's a single parameter in the series that stays flat for any considerable length of time. That was a really useful tool for keeping energy going and keeping it interesting.
Kiff and Rob, do you want to address episode 3? Like, I assume there's a dance that has to be rehearsed for your boom ops to stay out of the shot during that type of scene all in one room.
Yeah, so it was mainly Kyle and Tom. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously there's the stuff outside of the room, which was enough by itself, but in that room, yeah, they are just constantly spiraling. Kyle and Tom, that's it, 4 people in the room. So they were kind of constantly swirling around. Just, yeah, I will be forever amazed by their work in that room, because it's not short either, you know. I mean, Carl talks about this better than me, talking about that focus, and just also about kind of something as simple as how your muscles are reacting to that kind of movement and how your arms are kind of, you know, maintaining that kind of steadiness. But he just said, like, he just would lock into a position, and the kind of him and Tom would then need to adjust, because obviously the camera would have to go over it and round.
And also the lighting was going up and down as the weather was changing. So that was an extraordinary bit of boom work from the 2 of them. It was extraordinary.
It would have been extraordinary in a short scene, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is just definitely not that, you know. And there were moments where I'd have to, you know, Carl would have to hide and wait down the corridor. When I saw the camera pan off his door, I'd have to cue him, like, go down, you know, and he'd run up and be ready to go through the door back into the room, because otherwise he'd just be caught out and left out. I guess it's also kind of a James and Jules question, really, is, you know, how the booms and radio mics play together in that room. And
it's 50-50. The booms are always running. I mean, it was all challenging, the series, in a good way. But 3 with the dialogue had challenges, and partly because as soon as I started panning everything, it opens up the problems of space and perspective. And I think I said to you before, Rob, is that the boom ops were doing their job. So the camera would pan away and the boom would move closer to the other character. What we're having to do is actually pan that other character away and actually just add reverb to the boom and make sure that we're pushing it away. But you want the cleanest possible sound. So they were doing exactly the right thing. You know, there was a day when Jules and I were in the mix. It was right towards the end. I was like, we need to make that line of dialogue dirtier and further away and more off mic. I think we got to the point where it's like, we never say these things. Normally, like, we need it cleaner and closer and lovelier. And we were like, but the way we were working, in that episode was quite switching your brain a little bit.
So what you were basically saying is we need to hire one good boom op or one shit boom op next time, and then you'll have a choice.
No, 2 good boom ops, please.
I think we only have time for one more question. I'm going to aim it at the teamwork between Jules and James. James, you've mentioned a couple times about all the panning you did in editorial. How do you guys plan that so that it translates well on the mix stage? Jules, are you using his pans or starting from scratch? Because obviously panning on this show is a whole monster unto itself. It's way more than in a regular series.
Yeah, we knew that from the start. Jules and I have worked together for a long time, known each other for a long time. But we knew from the start that we needed to be able to seamlessly move from edit to mix. Working with Phil is that he wants to hear things all the time. So you need to be really finessed from the start. So things like the time-consuming nature of the panning, but also being able to write automation and reverbs and EQ and be able to seamlessly pass that over to the mix when we're hitting the temp or when we're hitting the premix was just so important. At least like probably 7 days per episode was me sat there panning, checking panning, and as new elements come in, checking it all and making sure it's all together and it all sounds fine. Because if you're listening just on the speakers, you can get away with a little bit of panning not being 100%, but as soon as you put headphones on, one element being down center when it should be left, like pings your ears straight away. So we knew really early on that it just had to be perfect. Jules and I working together and that handoff and the ability to just pretty seamlessly, Jules, to just hand it over to you to begin pre-mixing.
And because we were mixing in Dolby Atmos, by the time it got to the mix stage, I brought in all of James's panning and it was an amazing place already. It just meant that we could spend the time that we had just really refining those moments. And obviously there's a few places where even though the numbers might look right, so you've got dialogue 30% to the left and the Foley 30% to the left, something's not quite right, so you move things slightly differently. But it meant that we could just spend the mix time we have mixing, doing the stuff we were really supposed to be doing and refining stuff and working on those real intricate details that were so important to this show in particular.
That's the main thing, allowing us to be in the final mix and having fun. Save all the boring stuff for being at home.
Thank you very much for talking to me today. This show, I got to watch it kind of blind. I didn't know what I was getting into. It really blew my mind. I have a 12-year-old son, 1 year younger than the kid in the show, made me think a lot after I'd finished watching it. I really appreciate all the sound work you did because without the sound being as intricate and as detailed and real at times, the show just wouldn't have played. So congratulations on your Emmy nominations, and hopefully we get to talk again soon.
Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time is running out to get your field recording stories in. Remember, all submissions will be entered into a draw for a free pair of O-Mini microphones. Full details at tonebenderspodcast.com. Sound Ideas is introducing the newest installment to the Hollywood Edge's legendary sound effect collection, Premiere Edition, Volume 12. Build a rich audiosphere to enhance all your productions with this impressive assortment of sound genres ranging from machinery to nature to science fiction. Access over 3,000 sounds available in 4 resolutions with descriptive metadata and UCS formatting. Head over to sound-ideas.com to learn more. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues. Or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.